Good morning. My name is Omina McCoy. I am a third year MDiv student at Yale Divinity School, um, part of Yale University. This morning, I am here with Dr. Aubrey Hendricks. Um, Good morning, Dr. Hendricks. How are you?
Well, good morning, Mr. McCoy. I'm fine, fine. Good to talk to you.
Likewise, Dr. Hendricks is a senior lecturer in African American religion here at Yale Divinity School and has a very distinguished background. So, this is an opportunity for us to learn more about Dr. Hendricks, his career, and to talk a little bit about his latest publication and also what's happening this spring as far as courses are concerned. So, before I jump in, I just want to give a brief overview of Dr. Hendricks' distinguished background. He is currently a visiting scholar at Columbia University in the Department of Religion and in the Department of African American and African Diasporic Studies. He is a former visiting professor at Union Theological Seminary, an emeritus professor of biblical interpretation at New York Theological Seminary, a senior lecturer here at YDS in the area of African American religion. Dr. Hendricks is a distinguished senior fellow with the Democracy Collaborative in DC, and is also, I know, right, so many things. He's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He holds a Master of Divinity with academic honors from Princeton Theological Seminary and a Master of Arts and a PhD in Religions of Late Antiquity from Princeton University. So we're really glad to have him here at YDS. And it's a privilege to be able to talk with Dr. Hendricks today. So Dr. Hendricks, in your latest work, Christians Against Christianity, How Right-Winged Evangelicals Are Destroying Our Faith and in Our Nation, you give us a bit of background about how having, or how Christianity, you are an heir to this Christian faith, and you give us an overview of your familial ties and also how Christianity is really steeped into both sides of your family, maternal and paternal. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was born in Farmville, Virginia. Believe it or not, even though I'm only 39 years old, I was actually born in segregation, and I just came from both sides of my family were Christian in the real sense, the ethical sense, as well as the liturgical doctrinal sense. In that, you know, I guess what they really internalized and reflected was Afro-Christianity, which is based really on love and community, and acceptance of others. And so, of course, that set the foundation and totally influenced my understanding of what Christianity is supposed to be. At its basis, it's supposed to be about ethical community, right, based on love and justice. I offered that as a counterpoint to what Christianity has become in the mainstream here in America today, particularly, in the influence of that evil, walking amalgam of the seven deadly sins who used to sit in the White House, and but yeah, so my family, I had preachers, I had deacons, elders, ushers, or ushers, as we said in those days, gospel singers, and this has influenced my walk, but also the depth of my commitment, because these folk were just so majestic in their belief and in their lifestyle and what they've given to this country that it's like, I just can't be just some faux objective academic scholar, So I'm a committed scholar. I like to think that I at least trying to be a freedom fighter in the best of the Afro-Christian tradition. And I wrote this book, Christians Against Christianity, out of that tradition to as a resource against all the lies that are being told in the name of Christ and all the lives that are being destroyed. And I tried to kill everything standing with that book. You know, I've gotten a lot of hate and a lot of pushback, but you know, that's what we're supposed to get in America if you're doing right.
A mentor of mine will say that if people aren't pushing back, or if you don't have any opposition when it comes to social activism, social justice, anything in the realm of advocacy, then you're not doing something right. And
Exactly.
so the fact that folks have something to say in response to your latest work is a good thing, right? Because it generates conversation, it generates discussion. And
Yeah.
so thank you for that. I was reading the introduction, and it literally felt like you were just swinging through crowds of people with this really heavy wooden bat. My Nana has this wooden bat that she keeps by her door, but you were willing to knock down anything that was standing in the
Trying.
name of Christianity, in the name of God. So yeah.
Well, Jesus did use that go through the temple with that stick. You know, I don't know if he hit anybody, but I believe he at least scared them. At least came close. So yeah, we must operate out of that counter hegemonic, that counter empire impulse.
Dr. Hendricks, talk a little bit about, because I know that you refer to yourself as a social activist. Can you talk a little bit about your activism work in the realm of, in addition to being an academic scholar, and how you uphold those two things?
Yeah, so I told you I was born in Farmville, Virginia. They closed the schools rather than to segregate for 5 years. My family we migrated to Newark, and then on to a contiguous city, East Orange. But I grew up literally in the Black cultural nationalist movement in Newark with Amiri Baraka. I joined that in my early teens. And that influenced, that really influenced my sense of activism, something that's really a way of life, you know. But I guess I can trace activism really to 8th grade when I read the speeches of Malcolm X. Malcolm X Speaks, that little powerful book, and that was the first time I got in trouble for questioning what questioning what was being taught. You know, and I got put out of high school a bunch of times and all that kind of stuff, and you know. But then, as I said, I got in the nationalist movement, and from there, I mean, you know, Jeremiah talks about a fire being inside you. You know, I'm not trying to liken myself in any way, anything like that. It's just that I just have never been able to stand what I see. I just couldn't, and particularly the racism, have not been able to stand it. Thank God I moved beyond being a Black racist, you know, because I was that. I had a lot of antipathy toward all white people. I moved beyond that, but whiteness as an ideology, which is so destructive to white and Black people, no, I do have a very deep, a deep antipathy to that. And so, yeah, that's how my youth has influenced my activism, even now in my young middle age.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I've noticed, and just here during our time here at YDS, is bridging that gap between activism, social justice, and also academia, or learning rather how to balance the two, and taking what we're learning and putting that into practice when we leave this space. Ultimately, some of us will go on to be clergy, if we're not already leading churches, or are just lay ministers. Some of us will go on to law school. Some of us will head nonprofits, or some of us will become professors in our own right. And so wherever we end up, injustice will always meet us there. And it's our responsibility as leaders, right, in our community, to stand with community, among community, to listen with community, to tarry with community, and stand against systems of oppression.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why that is important, and also how we can even begin to do that work here, though we're still students? And
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, I think in the Christian sense, it really comes down to something very basic. Jesus says is equal to loving God, and that is loving our neighbor as ourselves. I mean, it's very basic, because that, I mean, the profound implications of that really, in a sense, give us our walking papers. If we're to love our neighbor as ourselves, we are to want the same kind of justice and security and good things of life for others as we want for ourselves, which means that it's, and Jesus calls it a commandment, it is a commandment to work for a just and loving and equitable society um, in whatever realm we find ourselves. And it's really that basic. But more than that, the reason I'm teaching this course next semester, Religion, Political Economy in the Black Community, is that we need to have the kinds of tools to be able to go out and to be clear on what's going on in the political economy and the various ways that we can help build our communities. And so students in Masters of Divinity programs, I think really have, I mean, really in a very formative space for struggle for justice in order to get these kinds of tools to go out and really make a difference. I mean, we need, for instance, I mean, capitalism distorts our lives and our relationships, and it militates against the the community ethos of the biblical witness. Yet we barely discuss capitalism. Preachers go out and their congregations are being destroyed by the excesses of capitalism, but they don't have the resource to try to understand these forces. Well, while we're in this formative stage in an educational space, these are the kinds of preparations that one can be involved. And that's a radical thing. I mean, to come out of seminary understanding, as Martin Luther King did, that democratic socialism is much closer to the biblical witness than capitalism could ever be, to come out with that kind of understanding, that's a radical and empowering and powerful thing. So yes, while you're doing you can be doing some very revolutionary freedom fighting work, sitting at your desk reading and preparing yourself, just like if you were preparing yourself for the ring, for the fight. That's where I'm coming from. That's why I'm teaching this course next semester, to try to be a part of that process.
I mean, you literally answered. I was going to ask you about the course that you were teaching this semester, and what the hope was for students to gain from that course, and also to take whatever it was that we would be learning, those skills and that knowledge, and put that into practice. So I'm glad that you went ahead and brought that up for us. And I also know that last semester you taught religious dimensions of the civil rights movement. Can you talk a little bit about that course for those of us who did not have the privilege of taking that last semester?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was asked to teach civil rights movement in the church. And I was like, well, that's like one class. I mean, really, that's like one class session, because most churches were not involved. And so I wanted to look at the ethical and religious impulses that inform the civil rights movement, and look at a number of the dimensions of the movement that were not really lifted up. For instance, we spent a lot of time on Black women's involvement in the civil rights movement. We looked at the basic, biblical ethic, the most foundational biblical ethic, which is mishpat, justice, and its various dimensions. and on from there. And it was very interesting conversation. But I'm particularly excited about this semester's course, because we get a chance to look at some stuff that I think is really, really interesting. I mean, we'll look at everything from liberatory justice, in the biblical sense, and the fact that social justice, when you look at Mishpat and Sadaqah put together, and then Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself, put together, social justice is the foundational ethic of the Bible. There's no question. And I have a chapter in my book, Christians Against Christianity, which I spend a good deal of time demonstrating that. And I think it's irrefutable. We'll look at policing, look at community development. We look at critiques of political economy that is so important. All kinds of tools. We look at the cooperative tradition, which is really important. And what we can do in our community with the cooperative tradition infused with with basic cooperative communal activities. Some would call them socialist, with a small s. But it's very wide ranging, this course will be, and I think students will come out very empowered. I've taught it at Columbia, and students have really, I must say, at least they told me that they love the course. Maybe they were angling for a better grade, I don't know, but they've told me that pretty much across the board. So I'm hoping it'll be the same here. So I'm excited to do this course here at Yale with students like yourself.
It sounds, I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but this sounds rich. It sounds not just rich, but it sounds timely, given what we are currently experiencing in the political realm, and even as our churches have to pivot in this new digital age, with churches that are closed, but still needing to reach the people, and also finding things to stand for in the community, and finding ways to do that in a new way. And also addressing the inactivity of our churches and speaking against these different things. And for us who are being trained to, but trained to go out and serve as pastors, to serve as associate pastors, to serve as youth pastors, whatever capacity we'll be in, eventually we'll be in positions of influence.
Yes.
So it's important for us to be able to get these skills at this point before we leave this institution. And so I'm excited about it. And it makes a huge difference when you have a professor who is just as excited as we are. And that emulates from you. So it's something to definitely look forward to. For students, Dr. Hendricks, who are not going into lay ministry, for students who are MARs, how will the course this semester be beneficial for them?
Well, it'll be beneficial the same way it'll be for MDiv students, really, because it's about giving tools and perspective, a critical perspective, for being able to evaluate evaluate the justness of what they are doing, and also have some expand one's perspective in terms of possibilities and alternatives. We're talking in the realm of policy, right?
Right.
And particularly, and maybe with the MAR people, even more so, one might say. And with policy, what's most important is being able to see the possibilities, the breadth of possibilities, and part of the problem well, for Black folks is that we don't really see the breadth of possibilities of kinds of policies we should be fighting for. Martin Luther King did. And so that's why, the last couple of years of his life, he finally came out of the closet saying, I'm about democratic socialism here. And he began to call out the beloved community. But that opened up a good deal more possibilities. That's why you could see the Poor People's Campaign and all of the changes that would have caused if they hadn't killed him a week before, which is why they killed him a week before, because the bonus march back in the 20s, was the 20s, the 30s, when veterans marched on Washington and trying to get a bonus that they've been promised for, this was in the 20s, yes, for fighting in World War I, during the Depression. I'm not saying that well. Veterans were, during the Depression, veterans said, no, we need a bonus that we were promised during World War I. We don't need it in 1945 when it was supposed to come to them. We need it now. Government wouldn't give it to them, so they marched on Washington, and there were tens of thousands of them. And it was that march that empowered Franklin Roosevelt to change the whole tone of government. Before that, the government was laissez-faire, so we have no responsibility to help people. Well, after the bonus march, and FDR saw that the government had to change, and all of a sudden we have a social safety net. And so Martin Luther King, this Poor People's Campaign could have done even more, because he would have gotten more people and a broader base of people. I mean, those are, well, I get carried away, but those are the kinds of things that are important when you see when your breadth of vision of policy possibilities is broadened.
All of that and more. There's another mentor of mine, Representative Robin Porter, who Democrat from the city of New Haven, usually says that when you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Meaning that it's important for us to understand what's happening in our communities and how policy influences our very fabric of our foundation, which is, our lives. And when we don't understand what's happening on the Hill, or when we don't understand what's happening in Hartford, it's a detriment to us. And so this is a way for us to understand what our community actually needs, why we need it, and ways to become engaged. Otherwise, you're just operating with blinders on. And that's not helpful to you, your family, or your community at large. And so I wholeheartedly agree.
We want the church to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, or just a neutral actor, and it's largely a neutral actor right now. Let's face it, the right wing, they're 15%, right wing evangelicals are 15% of the population, but they control the dialogue. And where are we? Sitting on the sidelines, reacting out of pain, and not being proactive. I mean, let's face it, that's that's one of the reasons I do this, try to do whatever I can to transform that perspective. That we come out as actors and not reactors.
Absolutely. And I agree with something else that you said about, not here in this meeting, but in Christians Against Christianity. One of the reasons for you writing the book is really to set the record straight. And it's important that we have more people who are willing to get the skills and the knowledge needed so that we can continue to set the record straight. So thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks, for your time and for being here at YDS. I know you are only here for a year. Is that correct?
Yeah, only for a year. And there's so many courses I'd love to teach, but I'm here for a year.
I bet. So, well, I'm happy that you are here. I hope more people will look at course selections, and do what's best for themselves, and also just get excited about what's being offered, and if their schedule allows, definitely take a look at religion, political economy in the Black community being taught by Dr. Aubrey Hendricks.
We'll have a good time. We'll have a good time.
It sounds like it. Thank you so much for your time, Dr.
Thank you
Hendricks.
so much, Ms.
Have a
McCoy.
wonderful day.
You too. Man.
Thank
Bye.
you.